I probably ought to begin this review with the admission that I've always had a soft spot for Namco's Ridge Racer. It stems from my vivid recollection of getting my hands on the original PlayStation back in the day, and playing the copy that came with it backwards and forwards. It was infuriatingly difficult, and there wasn't much of it, with literally just one track to race on, plus a few variants of it on higher difficulty settings. But it was a lot of fun, and it was the kind of game I could take pride in learning to play well. I had no way of knowing at the time that it would go on to develop into a series, but it surely did, spawning sequels and spin-offs in arcades and on consoles, including this, Ridge Racer 64, an exclusive version for Nintendo's N64 console. At a glance, Ridge Racer 64 is basically Namco's big-name arcade racing game, just how you know and love it. But quite importantly, this version wasn't handled directly by Namco themselves. Development of this game in the series was handed off to Nintendo Software Technology, Nintendo's North American first-party game development studio. Despite that, however, all the hallmarks of the series are here. It's got recognisable tracks, a selection of sporty rides decked out in customisable paint jobs, and it packs in a ton of references to other famous Namco games, which already makes it kind of cool. I mean, where else can you race a car with a Pac-Man paint job? That's all kinds of awesome right there. I do wish it made wacka wacka Pac-Man sounds as it went round the track, but I guess you can't have everything. Or maybe, via the magic of modern video editing technology, you can! You'll have to forgive me this minor indulgence, but don't try to tell me this isn't better. Besides tracks from the first Ridge Racer and its PlayStation sequel, Ridge Racer Revolution, there's a new one that's exclusive to this version. The publicity bump for the game at the time of its release boasted a pretty huge selection of tracks, as I recall, but in reality there's only 3. As is the tradition with the series, these get repurposed a few times over, either with new sections opened up or simply by letting you race around them in the opposite direction. The game also gives you a couple of options to tweak your play experience, allowing you to choose how crash mechanics work and one of 3 different drift modes. You probably don't need me to tell you that drifting is a big deal in this series, so you'll want to think carefully about which of these modes you choose. 2 of them reflect the different ways drifting worked in the original game and Ridge Racer Revolution, and there's a new Ridge Racer 64 mode that enables you to pull off some crazy 360-degree spins that give you an extra burst of speed when correctly executed. It's important to pick a mode you feel comfortable with, because mastering drifting is essential if you want to get anywhere. Admittedly, as series-defining game mechanics go, this emphasis on sliding around the track means these games won't appeal to everybody, and the N64 version is no different in that regard. If you want a racing game with more realistic physics, I'd say you should look elsewhere. There's certainly plenty of choice on this console after all. The thing to bear in mind is that this one's more of an arcade game, and taken as such, it's good fun. Just be warned that it's maddeningly tricky. There are literally no second prizes in Ridge Racer 64. Playing in Grand Prix mode, you can't advance to the next race until you've finished first in your current one. Second or third place just won't cut it. But the key to this game is practice, and lots of it. Stick at it and you'll eventually start to make headway. But to really cut into it, you'll need to pay careful attention to your driving. This isn't a game where you can just lean on the accelerator and waggle the stick to win races. The key to progress lies in learning how to use your brakes properly and drift like a pro to shave valuable seconds off your race time. Keeping your tyres on the track helps too. That's obvious advice for any racing game I know, but in this one it's all too easy to smack into the roadside barriers or other objects, which will kill your speed and give the AI drivers all the opportunity they need to zip so far in front that you'll never have a hope of catching up. slipping from first place as several cars sail past you because you came out of a spin at the wrong angle or smacked into a crash barrier, brings its own special kind of heartbreak in these games. But, like any decent console racer, Ridge Racer 64 encourages the player to race well, and doesn't skimp on the rewards for doing so. It's that quality about it that means winning, or maybe just doing a bit better each time, never feels impossible, and the more you persist, the more the game encourages you, opening up and offering opportunities to earn new cars to race with. Completing stages of the Grand Prix unlocks car attack races, where you'll race against a single new car head to head. If you beat it, that car will be added to your garage for later use. Lose against it and, well, you can race against it again as many times as you need to until you do unlock it. It's certainly worth snagging as many as you can because they all have appreciably different characteristics, and with the game being so unforgiving, finding one that suits your style of racing is of paramount importance. In some respects, Ridge Racer 64 does look a bit rough around the edges today. For me, the lack of more distinctly different courses to race on takes the sheen off it a bit, and as nice as it is to get a new track just for the N64, what basically amounts to 3 tracks still feels a bit stingy. There's a fair number of decent arcade-style racing games that offer more than that, and another issue is that the whole business of drifting can be frustrating to get to grips with at first. That's not helped by some slightly dodgy physics. I noticed that the cars all tend to pop out of a drift quite abruptly, with the nose of the car pointing a fair way away from where it feels like it should be. But it's something you get used to and compensate for, and certainly didn't spoil my fun. I'm not entirely sure how happy I am with the way the game handles though. You can steer with either the N64 controller's analog thumbstick or D-pad, but in practice I found the D-pad felt under-responsive, whereas the thumbstick, even though I suspect that's what the developers really intended players to use, seems prone to oversteer. Whatever, it takes a while to get used to, and it can be kind of off-putting at first. It's always been a characteristic of the Ridge Racer games that practice makes perfect, so be prepared to put in some serious time familiarising yourself with the tracks and getting competent. Like other games in the series, this one can be gruelling at times, and it punishes mistakes, which means it's maybe not the most approachable game if all you want to do is pick it up and start playing. But it does mean there's a certain feeling of well-earned satisfaction when the time you invest in it starts to pay off. I often think that, perhaps more than any other genre of video games, racing games tend to show their age much more noticeably when you look back at them. Mostly that's because their presentation has become such an important selling point, and the ever-advancing hardware specs of newer game systems simply means the old can't hold a candle to the new in that respect. You could even say there's a risk of older console racing games feeling obsolete if you follow that line of reasoning. But if an older game manages to become iconic, or has its own unique feel and personality, it can still hold your attention, which is true in any genre. And in my opinion, that certainly applies to the Ridge Racer series as a whole. If I put my cards on the table, I've got to say I don't love Ridge Racer 64 the same way I do the first PlayStation game. I think I'd rather get my fix from that. But this one's got more than enough of the classic Ridge Racer feel and character about it to make it worth a look. It may not be my favourite game in the series, but it makes the jump to the N64's idiosyncratic hardware rather well, and I actually think there's something cool about seeing the series represented on something other than a Sony-made console for the first time, for whatever that's worth.